Welcome to the Stanford MBA Two-Generational Wisdom Bridge across 30 years. I'm your host, Catherine Keogh McLennan from the MBA Class of 1995 of Stanford. In each episode, I bring together one of my classmates, now in our 60s, give or take, and a member of the class of 2025, now in their 30s, give or take, and about to graduate into an entirely different world than we graduated in 1995. Back then, we finished our MBAs just as the internet was emerging. Today's grads are stepping into a future shaped by artificial intelligence, uncertainty, and we hope that we express possibility. These conversations bridge generations, share lessons, and spark reflections on leadership, life, and what's next. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Kathy Sarlson from the Stanford MBA Class of 1995 and Andrew Lobel from the Class of 2025. Kathy is the National Director of Life and Legacy, a philanthropic initiative helping Jewish organizations across North America build endowments through legacy giving. With over 35 years of nonprofit leadership, she's helped raise tens of millions of dollars in planned gifts while strengthening Jewish community institutions in healthcare, housing, and education. She holds degrees from the University of Michigan, Harvard Divinity School, and Stanford Graduate School of Business. Andrew is a second-year MBA student at Stanford and the current president of the Jewish Business Students Association. Before business school, he worked in private equity at New Mountain Capital and will join Avesi Partners after graduation. A Harvard graduate, Andrew brings a long-standing commitment to Jewish leadership, community service, and deep reflective dialogue. Together, we explored how Jewish identity shapes leadership, workplace culture, and moral courage in times of global and personal uncertainty. From the aftermath of October 7th, 2023, and its event from the aftermath of October 7th, 2023, and its impact on Jewish communities worldwide, to the evolving role of business leaders in complex social debates, Kathy and Andrew reflect across 3 decades of Stanford experience, offering a generational handoff of purpose, resilience, and the power of authentic conversation. It's so nice to see you guys. And this hour, who knows what will come up, but we've been having some fascinating conversations with some of your classmates and my classmates, of which Kathy is. So, Andrew, where do we find you on this fine, what is it over there, Tuesday?
You find me in very high spirits. I'm right off of campus in the house that my wife and I live in College Terrace. And I had class this morning with Glenn Cramen, Winning Writing. He's the former managing editor of the New York Times. He is unbelievable. It is a really fantastic class.
Oh my
Highly
gosh.
recommend.
Yeah.
And then
you think?
It's been a great day. I did some errands, did some final assignments, went to the driving range like a good GSB student should. Had some meetings, and here we are.
Oh, fantastic, Andrew. And Kathy, where are we, or you, to be specific?
So right at this very moment, I am in lovely Springfield, Massachusetts. So I'm about 10 minutes away from the international headquarters of the foundation that I work for, which is in a very small town.
Okay.
And although I'm based outside of Philadelphia, I try to come up here every 4 to 6 weeks just to spend some time in the office with my colleagues there.
And Kathy, this is a new one, I think a new adventure. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think I didn't even get to hear it, but I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I'll tell you a little bit about it and how I got there. So I've been at this family foundation for about a year now. And the focus of the foundation is about really building and sustaining vibrant joyful Jewish life. And their flagship program is one that focuses on literacy and sending Jewish books to they're literally sending out millions of books a year all over the world to Jewish kids. And on top of that, doing a lot of family engagement projects. So it's really about giving people the experience, the joy of living Jewishly. And they also have a few other projects. So I'm the national director of a project in which we provide grant funding and consulting services to help Jewish organizations really learn how to do fundraising and specifically how to build out their own endowment funds so that they'll be here for the future.
For the future.
So that's the project that I'm working on.
And Kathy, that's a long career of 30 years of doing amazing things for organizations and leading them, which we might hear from. But Andrew, you got in touch with me because you are, what do they say, the president of the
Jewish Business Students Association, the JBSA.
Yeah,
I know it's a handful.
Did you?
I did that
didn't even
too.
know. I didn't even know. What, you were president?
I was.
There you
go.
Way. Yeah,
that's really cool. One of my questions I wanted to ask you was whether the JBSA existed back then and to what extent, if at all, you were involved. So this is a real past.
I'm just glad to hear that it still exists. And the way I got to this job is, I think, relevant to that. If it's okay, I'll just throw that in.
Please, Kathy.
Which is I've been working in fundraising for over 35 years. I was working for nonprofits before I came to the GSB.
You were.
My last position, I was AVP of Plan Giving and Endowments for a large academic medical center in Philly. I was planning on staying there till I retired or did something else. And then October 7th happened. And I had worked in the Jewish community previously, and I felt really strongly pulled to go back. And also a bit of a push in that I felt very out of place where I was working and didn't feel like there was the space for many of us to talk about what was happening or what we were experiencing. And as it happened, a week later, I got a call from this foundation. So I'm like, okay, I'm going.
And what was the timing just coincidental, Kathy, or were they looking to really ramp up and get somebody superstar like you?
Well, that's kind of you.
You were.
It was accidental, unless we think like it was serendipity. But the person who had run the program for many years was ready to retire from doing that, and so they recruited me. And
it's pretty straightforward.
Kathy,
go.
If
Andrew.
I may say, I'm sorry you felt the way you did at your prior employer. At the same time, hearing you describe how October 7th was a pivotal moment for you gave me goosebumps, and it really resonated. I mean, for me, my wife, my whole family, so many in our community, October 7th was a gigantic point in the history of the Jewish people, and your story, it really touched me.
Andrew, tell me, and one of the things you mentioned, Andrew, in the note is when I asked people what they wanted to talk about, you did want to talk about the campus and the environment on the campus, and I'd love to hear it. I'm sure Kathy would, because I'll come back to Kathy at that time. Anyway, let's hear about 30 years later, and then we'll go back 30 years.
Sure, and I'll give some basic back of the baseball card stats about myself, just for context.
Please, that too.
So I'm from New York City. The Big Apple, was born and raised on the Upper East Side, and my family would identify as modern Orthodox.
Okay.
So we observe the Sabbath, we eat kosher food, we observe all the Jewish holidays. I went to a Jewish day school called Ramaz, and that basically means we were in school from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Half of the day was regular math, science, history, English, all the good stuff. And then the other half of the day was Hebrew language, the Hebrew Bible, Jewish law, Jewish thought. And so it was really a dual curriculum. And the day started at 8 a.m. with services. You had afternoon services. The school was observant in its, in its practice as well. So that's where I'm coming from. I was very involved in my synagogue growing up. I credit my parents for being incredible role models. I have two older sisters who are also incredible role models. And I think that being part of the Jewish people has been so enriching for my life. I think that, we were raised with this belief that we are one link in a chain that goes back thousands of years. And
absolutely,
there's been a lot of challenge that comes with that. And October 7th is certainly a prime example, but there's also there's a lot of gratitude that I feel, and a lot of goodness and enrichment to my own life that's come from being part of the extended Jewish community. So that's a little bit about my Jewish identity.
Wow.
After I graduated high school, I went to Harvard. I was very involved in Jewish life there. I was on the leadership teams of the Chabad there and of the Hillel at Harvard, and I'm actually on the board of directors of Harvard Hillel to this day, which is something I felt passionately about in terms of giving back to a community that gave so much to me when I was an undergrad. I studied history and economics, which I absolutely loved. My senior year thesis was on the financial panic of 1792, which is not the most well-known one. But
that's fantastic. I'm a history major, so you bring it on, Andrew.
There you go. So I can send you my thesis.
I'd love it.
It's a fun one.
It.
Great. We could do a sequel podcast all about the crash of 1792.
I'd love to.
Exactly. So
and how does one go from there? Now, I did biology as my second, so your economics. Did you? What was the in between your Harvard
in between
and Stanford?
was finance. I was always interested in business and finance, and I did the tried and true path of investment banking at Credit Suisse when it was still around.
Before it was.
And then I worked at Then I worked at a private equity firm called New Mountain Capital, based in New York City, and it was a tremendous learning experience. And at the same time, I thought to myself, God willing, I will have a long career when I'm 70 years old. Looking back, taking 2 years to meet new people, try new things, gain new skills will only be accretive to my professional life and my personal life. So applied to business school. Yes.
Oh, well, yeah, keep going. I'm just reminding you that we're hovering around 60 and still young. Just telling you. Okay, keep going.
Yes,
keep going.
Exactly. So all that's to say, I applied to business school, was incredibly fortunate to be accepted to Stanford. And the fact that my wife and I had no friends or family in the Bay Area was a feature, not a flaw. We were excited to go on an adventure, and here we are.
Yeah. So, okay, Kathy, let's go back 30 years then. And we can talk about anything, but because of the two of you, I would just love to talk about the activism and the issues we've seen. So take us 30 years back. We're starting 1993, finishing 95. Interesting time to be in Silicon Valley. We had to do various projects, and I had this little company called, I think there was like 100 people, called Cisco, and I had to look at their culture. And so it was an interesting time. The year we graduated was the year that the internet really took off, the browser with Netscape. But by the by, I mean, Kathy, take us 30 years ago into what your passion was and almost how that links up to the work you're doing today.
Sure. So I guess to go back a few steps even before that.
Yep.
It's funny, I have 3 adult children now, and so whenever they've meandered, I'm very patient because I completely meandered throughout most of my studies and my career. And I went to college at University of Michigan thinking I was going to go into education. And then I ended up becoming a psychology major, and then I became a religion major, and then I went to Harvard Divinity School. So I also spent a little time at Harvard and
my goodness,
and studied theology just because. And really enjoyed my time there. And right after that, started working for a nonprofit. I moved to the Bay Area completely on a whim with no job. And I ended up working at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And I sort of faced this crossroads where I thought, well, maybe I'll keep working for the nonprofit sector, but maybe there's something for me in the for-profit. So I actually went to Stanford just to figure that out. And my summer internship was at a tiny little software company. I had a opportunity with Intuit, but it was just going to be all like numbers crunching. So I was able to help make the store displays. It was very hands-on, and I like that. But I had no passion for software. So I decided when I finished, and I got I guess it was the PMP and the certificate in nonprofit management, and took some really good classes on that I really was going to remain in the nonprofit sector. And we moved to Philly, and I worked at our local Jewish Federation and other organizations. But I think when I was there, it really wasn't about the activism. It was more social, and it was important to me to have a network of other Jewish students. So so we had this Jewish business students group and we did social activities, and I met my kid's dad through that
you
because
did.
he was the co-leader of the Jewish law students group. So,
Fantastic.
it was at some potluck at a professor's house
Oh, you
on
gotta love
campus.
it. You gotta love it.
So, that's in part, I'm sure, what it was designed for. And
Yeah.
yeah, but I would say that as a college student at Michigan, I
Mm,
was more of an activist, and there are a
mm,
lot of marches I went on. And so
mm.
my experience in that way actually informs the perspective I have, which may seem controversial, that I look with some concern about how do we respond to activism on campus today, and where's the line that it crosses when it
Yeah.
becomes destructive and dangerous and harmful. But I would hate to live in an environment where college students are never allowed to be activists or
Right.
protest anything. So
Yeah.
that's something I really grapple with right now. And I have to say, like, and from a distance after October 7th, seeing some of the images of graffiti on the Stanford campus, there were things that I saw that I found so disturbing, yet challenged to figure out a response. And also, being an alum of Harvard, as you are, being absolutely horrified by Harvard's initial response.
My 5-year college reunion was last year, and it was spring, and there were just like, I was moving out of my dorm, moving into the apartment I was going to live in over the summer in San Francisco, but I also distinctly remember feeling that I had absolutely no interest in stepping foot on Harvard's campus after what had been unfolding since October 7th. And I actually thought it was important to tell my friends that, and tell
Good.
the people in my class at the GSB who were going back that that's how I felt. And I really do feel at the same time a lot of gratitude for what my Harvard education taught me. And
Mm.
my roommates at Harvard walked down the aisle at my wedding as groomsmen. So I do have a lot
Wonderful.
of gratitude there. But I think to your point about where is the red line, something that I really struggled with is, one, where is the red line when people are calling for violence against Jewish students or the
Absolutely.
dismantling of the
Yeah.
settler colonialist state, as many different chalking said in White Plaza last year. And also, I mean, I took, when I was at Harvard, so many, what's the word I'm looking for, trainings about what language I'm allowed to use to refer to different people and different populations, and harassment training and bullying training. And this was something that was really ingrained in us. And then
Ha.
seemingly, when the language is targeting Jewish students or Israeli students, those standards no longer apply. And so the double standard is what was really troubling. And of course, you could say the climax was when Claudine Gay testified in front of Congress that calling for the genocide of a people is really context dependent. So those were some of the challenges I was also grappling with.
For sure.
So, okay, so you specifically don't go to your Harvard, which makes so serious sense. So what happens then on Stanford, and how do you express what's going on in your heart and your mind, Andrew?
I should say that about Stanford, it's a tale of two cities. There's Stanford University, and then there's the GSB. And the GSB, for the most part, has been the most supportive, inclusive, and warm community to myself and other Jewish and Israeli students and faculty here. One anecdote is, the week after October 7th, there was a dinner that was held in solidarity with victims and Jewish and Israeli students. And I think over 300 people from the GSB attended, which was
Wow.
students, faculty, administrators, which is a tremendous showing. There were first-person testimonies from Israelis about what they had seen. There were Israelis who had to fly back to Israel because they were called up to reserve duty, who were zooming in from their base, talking about the truly horrifying things that they saw. And there's not a dry eye in the room. And, so I'll say at the GSB, I think we like to think that around 10% of the class or so is Jewish. So about 40 people per year in a class of 420. And so if you think of a room of 350 people, the vast majority of whom are not Jewish and are allies, so to speak, that was, I think, to me, really captures the essence of the GSB. And a lot of that is the credit of the administrators, the people here, obviously, the admissions committee. And then the flip side is Stanford University was really hard. And I think for many GSB students, as I'm sure you all are well aware, campus is huge. So White
Yes.
Plaza, for some, is like a 15 to 20 minute walk away. And unless you are really dying to buy a notebook or a coffee mug from the Stanford bookstore, you might never have a reason to really walk there, which is a separate, that means for many people, they weren't really aware of what was going on. And then every now and then I'd have a friend reach out to me and say, dude, have you seen what's going on in White Plaza? Like, that is crazy. And the school's not doing anything about it, but they're violating. I'm referring to, there was an encampment in White Plaza, which were people on the one hand exercising freedom of speech and protest, and on the other hand, there were instances of someone in the encampment wearing a Hamas headband. There were instances of deeply disturbing signs and posters calling for violence or the destruction of the Jewish state or against Jewish students. It was also in clear violation of university policy around time and place and overnight, and seemingly the university was not doing anything about that. So on the one hand, it was troubling, and on the other hand, I think for the most part at the GSB, people don't really talk about politics. The rosy way to look at that is that, as someone has said to me here, people really prioritize community over cause, whereas in other schools, they prioritize cause over community. I think perhaps the more pragmatic explanation is people come to business school for the network, whether it's your classmates or alumni. And so there really are no incentives to engage in activity or speech or political activism that might jeopardize that, which, you could argue that there are some downsides to that. And are we missing out on having conversations that would otherwise really enrich our experience? But that's the reality. The flip side is I've had a lot of one-on-one conversations that are deeply meaningful with Jewish students, non-Jewish students, Muslim students, really across the gamut. And so that's been deeply gratifying. And if anything, everything happening on campus was an impetus, and there was a lot of fodder to talk about. And it gave me a lot of opportunities to share what I was going through as a Jewish student who proudly identifies as a Zionist.
It's been a very warm home for you and for other Jewish students. So that's, that makes me feel good. I think as an alum, what I was experiencing is getting on I'll admit I'm like never on WhatsApp, but I went on various WhatsApp groups of GSB Jewish alums and other Stanford Jewish alums. And while initially it was helpful to get other people's perspectives and, have this sense of, we're so upset. At other times, the vitriol on so many other issues and people saying things that I did not agree with or believe in was not a warm and welcoming place. So I'm glad to hear that at least on the ground at the GSB, it was as good as it could be, and that in some ways one could be a little insulated on what was happening on the rest of the campus if you chose to be.
Like you, I joined many a WhatsApp group after October 7th, all variations on Stanford, Israel, Vanguard, support, defense, community, and I've probably muted the majority of them, not because they're not, there's just a lot of stuff there that doesn't really resonate with me, or I have enough GSB group chats as is. I will also say there's a question of, what is the role of the university in making public statements for or against political events. And depending on who you ask, last year, John Levin either wrote a wonderful email or he waited way too long to write an email, or he wrote an email, but it was too little too late. That was another question, because I think, again, going back to what I thought was a double standard, it felt like Russia invades Ukraine or some other hallmark event happens and the school is very quick to say, we condemn, we don't stand for this, this does not align with our missions and values. And, when it comes to October 7th in Israel, it was a little bit thornier and the school didn't make the statement. Personally, I also am fine with the Chicago style of not really opining on anything, which is, I think, a perfectly reasonable response. But the question again goes into, when do you decide that you are going to adopt that stance after many years of behaving differently?
I think a lot of universities did exactly that. They suddenly made the decision that they would not opine on anything because they found it so difficult. I will say, having at the time worked at a university that I thought handled it well, or certainly better than most, I think they really kept the focus first on being able to speak clearly about acts of terror unequivocally, but then really focusing on the fact that how do we help our own community, right? So how do we help our Palestinian students and our Israeli students and our Jewish students who are profoundly affected? And how do we kind of turn inward to ensure this is a safe and caring and healing community? So I appreciated that in terms of the public statement. At the same time, I think, similar to something you said earlier, I had helped lead certain kinds of trainings within my own department in the years prior, and to help us all be more responsive to the diversity of those around us. And I'm 100% glad I did it, and I do it again. And after October 7th, there was silence, and it took a while for me to get over my resentment, to talk to my colleagues and say, hello. And for my non-Jewish colleagues, there was this real fear of saying the wrong thing, deeply understanding what the impact was. You know, for me to have to explain, it's not like saying I have family in Switzerland and something bad happened in Switzerland. When something bad happens in Israel, it's a complete, like, people, if they haven't lived that experience, they just don't know. So I had to give people a lot more grace. But it wasn't, I kept sort of knocking on the door. We need to be doing something about this. We need to be doing it. And luckily, somebody came in at a high level in HR who actually started making something happen and piloted it with my department. But it took a couple of months, and by then, I was leaving. But I was glad that they eventually got there. But I think that was a pretty common experience.
I was going to say some additional family background. My dad is from South Africa, and he grew up in apartheid South Africa. And his grandmother, or I guess my grandmother, sorry, she was an incredibly strong woman. And my dad's father passed away when he was relatively young. And my grandma was steadfast in telling my dad, who's the oldest of 4 boys, that the situation in South Africa is terrible and he has to get the heck out of there and come to America and bring his brothers with him because the future under an apartheid regime was not great. And so I just heard you mention the word apartheid, and that's immediately where my head went.
Yes, I'm in Sydney, and Sydney particularly has such a vibrant South African Jewish community. I've got a few friends there. They are vibrant. Oh my gosh. But Andrew, back to you.
Just briefly, I know we're going on like 1,000 different tangents. I was in Sydney last year for my GST, my global study trek with the GSB, and I was there for 2 weeks, and I went a few days earlier, and I was able to celebrate Shabbat with the local Jewish community there.
Wonderful.
And
Nice.
vibrant is a wonderful word to describe it.
Yeah. So what's in your mind as you listen to Kathy and you think about the conversation to be had? What's your reflection?
I have a lot of reactions. One is on an institutional level, there were a lot of voices who I heard saying things like, the same way there are trainings about racism or anti-racism or Islamophobia or homophobia or, all sorts of things, we need to have trainings about anti-Semitism. And I always struggled with that because I wasn't sure that having more and more trainings and more groups defined under, or the Office of Inclusion was necessarily the answer, because as a student who took those trainings, I'm not sure that was really, a huge ROI on that one. I think being a business school is really unique because, one, what I mentioned earlier, the emphasis on creating connections, and two, people here, at least in my experience, are open-minded and mature and are interested in collaborating together. And there were so many opportunities to have one-on-one conversations or very small group conversations. And even as an example, I had the opportunity last March to go to Israel with my wife and some family members on a very volunteer-oriented mission where we were, walking through some of the communities that were devastated on October 7th, for example, near Oz, where 1 in 4 residents were either kidnapped or killed. And we had the chance to speak to people who were barricaded in their bomb shelter in their home while terrorists torched their belongings. And I had photos and anecdotes, and I kept a very detailed journal, and I came back to campus and I felt like it was a duty to share that. I actually flew from Israel to Australia. And so I'm in Australia, and one of the universal symbols for the hostages that still remain in captivity is the yellow ribbon. And I was wearing my yellow ribbon in Australia, and people would say to me, "What's your ribbon?" And I wanted them to ask so that I could talk to them about where I was and what I had seen and what was going on. So people are really open-minded, and I'm grateful to be part of that kind of community. As it relates to the institutional questions, those are deep. I am not equipped to answer, on an institutional level, especially because when I think about Stanford University, there's the medical school, the law school, the business school, the engineering school, the undergrad, 1,000 different PhD and master's programs, each one with their own administrations and their own student bodies and population and admissions criteria and hiring criteria and curriculum and faculty. What does it even mean to have a Stanford University policy or voice or community? It's so decentralized. So maybe Kathy has more insights there than I do.
The dynamics that you guys had and replicate and can replicate going forward at the business school, the more I talk to you guys, the more, Kathy, the more aware of this class and maybe some of the previous ones, real understanding on the cultural implications, how to deal. That's where I've been for the last 30 years, fascinated with people's behaviors and how they manifest in organizations and how there's such clashes based on such surface tension. But once there's not an institution, Andrew, I so would love to see you continue to build those communities, because like Kathy said, even a university where you are, Kathy, can't handle those polarities, so to speak.
I am intrigued by something you said, Andrew, because I would say in all of this, and it's very strange to say this, the most meaningful conversation I had after October 7th was with a friend of mine who has, her family is from Lebanon. And we had this entire conversation, oddly enough, via text. And via text, she was able to pour her heart out to say, my heart is breaking for you and the Jewish community and Israel. And I have Palestinian friends and my heart is broken for them. And we were just able to converse person to person about the people impacted. And there was learning, there was no judgment. And so I do wonder, it would be wonderful to feel like we could build on those kinds of structures. And I think that is happening in certain quarters of how do you have the conversations and share the stories that bring people together with compassion, and yet acknowledging that it's okay to want to protect your own family and to have very strong emotional feelings. And I also think that sometimes when we just read the news clips of all the rhetoric around this issue in particular, what we don't hear are the people who are having those conversations. We don't hear the different groups that are intentionally coming together to learn from one another.
I'm really touched hearing you relay that conversation, and also really applaud you for being able to have a civil conversation on a difficult topic over text message. That is,
I don't know how that
no
happened.
small
It
feat.
was very strange, but it did happen that way. Yeah.
I think if you really want to take a big gulp from the GSB Kool-Aid, the most popular class at Stanford is Touchy-Feely, where it's all about leading with empathy, active listening, lead with curiosity, don't be judgmental. And that's kind of drilled in here. And I know that after October 7th, there were multiple conversations that were actually facilitated by Touchy-Feely facilitators with groups of students who are Jewish or Israeli or Muslim or Arab or from the Middle East, or just people who felt very connected to this issue from either side. And I was fortunate enough to participate in one of those conversations. And it's exactly what you described. When you come from a place of, here are my values. I value security, prosperity, peace, and we want that for everyone. And you start from a place of values and not a place of demands or interests or political realities. There's a lot more common ground there than I think we often realize. You're right. That's not covered in the news. That doesn't get clicks. That doesn't sell subscriptions.
It's certainly a place where I do feel like the values espoused by this family foundation are very close to my own values, and I feel good about what we're building together. Doesn't mean that everyone who works there has the same religious beliefs or political beliefs, culture beliefs, and I think, and there has been an attempt to give space to that,
Yeah. Okay.
um, and and I don't know, I'm going to digress for a moment back to what we were talking about, which is if we look at universities, if we look at businesses, because I think when you leave the GSB bubble and wherever, and I that's true for all of us, right? And then when you work in a workplace, sort of what are the companies that can stay the course and be aligned with their values? And so people who work there share those values, and that they're not necessarily going to embrace a certain cause because, let's be clear, they think they're going to make more money being the company that stands up for X. And as soon as they think it's not, they're going to retreat from it.
Yep.
So I wonder how any of us, like in our own companies, can maybe be part of that conversation. What are the values of this company, and how do we live those values consistently despite what might be happening?
You make me think. Well, I was going to say the two things that come to mind are there is a famous Jewish phrase, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I think there is a rich history in the Jewish tradition of iron sharpening iron, and debate is not something to be shied away from. And it sounds like, at least, Kathy, in your workplace today, there is this really vibrant workplace culture of their varying opinions. People may not agree on everything, but it's in the service of a shared goal or mission or shared values. So I think that really is critical. I'll also say, giving a shout out to one of the best classes I've taken at the business school. It's called Religion and Spirituality in the Workplace, taught by Professor Scotty McLennan.
Wow.
Yes.
I'd like to take
And
that one.
it is amazing. And
I'm so
every
interested.
week, it was fantastic. Every week there was a different business exemplar from a different religion or different spiritual belief system, and we would read a little bit about that religion or that belief system. We would have the guest speaker, and the guest speaker would watch us talk for a little bit about some of the study questions and then respond to them, and we'd have a bit of a dialogue. And then the second class of the week would be just the class debriefing the speaker. And first of all, that was unreal. When I was in college, I loved taking classes on religion and trying to understand. I took a class on the history of Islamic thought. I took a class on all sorts of different religious sort of studies, and that was deeply gratifying, and I think also made my own Jewish observance a bit more meaningful, which I enjoyed. And being in this kind of class where we're exposed to not just the religions, but then thinking about how does this religion and these values manifest in the workplace or in someone's career.
Really interesting.
And the final assignment was basically saying, you've heard from all these religions or spiritual belief systems, which ones resonated most with you, and what will you take with you into your career? And I think if maybe all of us thought a little more deeply about those questions, that'd be a good thing. I should pull out my paper. I can send it to you after for review. Yeah. But I think there is, so this might be a controversial take. The first thing I'll say is, and we read this article for this class, this notion of maybe you don't need to bring your whole self to work, and it's okay to have, you should bring yourself and be honest about who you are and be honest about your values and what's important to you. And at the same time, we had Reed Hastings came in and he made a comment that at Netflix, they are a company, not a family. And it's very hard for us to internalize that because the primary unit of which human civilization has defined itself for however many years has been the family. But at the end of the day, the workplace is not a family. You might be a team, and there might be role players and a coach and a captain, and everyone's got their role, and you need to be high functioning and you need to be collaborating, but you're not a family. You can disagree, but maybe some disagreements aren't for the workplace. I'm a little bit, Kathy, you alluded to this, I'm a little bit cynical about some of the employee resource groups or business resource groups. And I'm torn because my wife was very involved in founding the employee resource group at her employer after October 7th. And they've hosted incredible events, whether it be Holocaust remembrance events or just education about different topics. And on the other hand, it's a slippery slope of all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
I might be dancing around the exact question, but I think it's important to be upfront about what's important to you, what are your values, and then just living them and acting them every day. Another thing I learned from my parents is people respect people who respect themselves. That was a lesson that was ingrained in me, and it's easier to do something 100% of the time than 99% of the time. So when I think about, for example, my own religious observance, whether it's observing Shabbat or eating kosher food or other sorts of things, those are my guiding principles, and I think they're broadly applicable here as well.
Andrew, you raised such interesting. I have a very, very deep spirituality myself, which is an integrationist. It goes back, and we study. I mean, God, the Hebrew is the most pure language, along with the Vedic language, and also Sanskrit. I mean, and so I love that, and I love the elements of it. But I don't want to share that with my clients or with that. There's something that is absolutely, even my relationship, I'm just new for 2 years and my partner's not really interested in that. I said, well, number one, God comes first. And, have to understand that and the pressure that I can talk to him about that, but I'm never going to say that at work. People, I don't know if they could cope with it. And I love the fact that we're that class existed so we can actually reflect how we appear inside at work, because it ain't easy, I can tell you, after all these years.
So interesting, because I think that's the difference about like my choosing right now to be back working for a Jewish organization, because it's very intentional to bring those values to the fore. And I just had a team retreat. We have I've only been there a year, 2 people have been there about a decade, and I just brought somebody new onto our team. And for team building, I did this sort of speed dating exercise. I gave each person a card. To make a long story short, it was like put your Myers-Briggs type and what are some of the strengths you bring from that? What are some of the challenges you bring from that? And I had like a little handout that listed some of those for each type. But then it was also like, what are some Jewish values that inspire your work, and what does that look like? And then we each met with each person and could write down notes about what each person said, just so and it was funny because 2 people are related and they like learn something new about each other. But for me, this value of like, basically I feel that I have a life mission, and that I have certain things. There's like a Jewish concept of like, essentially you can't do everything, but you got to figure out what you're supposed to do and do that. You really can't like escape from that responsibility. And so it's nice being in an environment where it's appropriate to talk about spirituality and religion. So that's kind of a choice about where I work. And obviously, there might be other things I don't bring to my job, but that's one thing that I can bring.
Okay, so Andrew, this is the terrible question for some of you in year 2. Some of you, what are you going to do after you graduate? I mean, I know it wasn't a good question for me, but how do you bring so many of this? Because you come from investment banking and private equity. So how do you now manifest all this? We're using manifest. How do you bring this to what you want to do or what you intend to do?
It is a great question, because Kathy, when you were speaking, I was thinking to myself, in some ways, I'm so lucky to be in a university context in these last 2 years, because I'm not in a workplace. I'm in a place that's all about, I know it's about networking and job stuff, but it's about ideas. And I mean, I can say honestly, coming to business school, I knew that I wanted to be very involved, and I probably knew I wanted to be one of the co-presidents of the JBSA, but I didn't anticipate that post October 7th, this was in some ways my number one priority on campus. And if I were working a very intensive job, it would have been very, intellectually stimulating and motivating in different ways, but I don't know that I would have been able to tap into this gear in the same way. And so, similar to what you were describing, being in a Jewish organization, that's how I felt being on campus. And when I think about what I want to do and bringing this to my next job, so I'm fortunate I have my next role. I am going back to private equity, whereas previously I was at a very large, established tenured, successful firm. I'm going to another very successful firm, but they're much smaller. They're newer. They were founded in 2021. I think they're about 20 or 25 people. So in typical GSB fashion, I am channeling my entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, you're going to help build it. That's exciting.
Yes, that was the goal. I joined one place when it was already fully formed, and I'm really hoping I can be a part of the growth story at the firm I'll be going to. And the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know that it is necessarily appropriate to be banging on all the partners' doors on the proverbial October 8th and saying to them, we need to do something. We need to make a statement. We need to raise awareness. There might be other things. It might be on a coffee chat or lunch or in person, or just saying, hey, just want to let you know this is a hard day for me, as you may have seen in the news, but it's really different. So I think that's something I think a lot about, and we'll see how it goes. Again, in some ways, my friends who work at organizations that are very vocal about this issue, they feel so supported, and I'm really happy for them. And I have other friends who say, I was on these calls, I couldn't concentrate, no one asked me how I was doing, aren't they aware of what's going on in the news? I think it really comes down to authenticity. I think I'm one of the few people who can say that I loved my boss back when I was working in investment banking. He was incredible. And in the summer of 2020 in New York City, lockdown and COVID, there was a huge bout of, anti-Asian racism and violent attacks. And we had Asians and Asian Americans in my group, and my boss, who is a white Jewish finance guy, he was really well meaning, and he called a hands-on call with the 35 people in our group, and he spoke really passionately about the impact that he could imagine this was having on our teammates, and just wanted to articulate that he was there to support. And if you're going through things, don't hesitate to reach out. And because it felt genuine and authentic, that was great. There was no broad proclamation or statement. And I think to me, that's the key. So I hope to bring that kind of authenticity with me.
As we look at this generation, and Andrew, we're both at cusp. So Kathy and I were at the cusp of the generation of baby boomers changing to Generation X, and you're at the cusp of Generation Y turning to Generation Z. So what does that mean? I'm not sure, but
I feel very far from Generation Z. I don't understand how they speak or how they text.
Okay, see, that's interesting. Whereas that's very interesting. So, Kathy, not that relates to anything, but generationally, both of us have children. What's our hope for your generation? What's our hope for our children? And 30s, it might be in this context, it might be in something, but we have I'd like to say wisdom, but it's not even wisdom. It's hard-won experience. You call it, Kathy. What is it? What's our hope for these guys?
So this might just be particular to me and to my specific children. The first words that came to mind for me were like, wake up. And at times I know that they're passionate about different issues. And I look forward to a time that they will, I guess, to come full circle, feel like they can be more activists, in sensible ways, in ways that they keep themselves safe, but not just to opine, or be snarky about things or, watch a bunch of videos about an issue, but feel confident enough to engage or to do something political, or, whether it's choosing to give charity, or it's choosing to march, or it's choosing to advocate. But that's certainly my hope for them, and to not necessarily feel like they can easily stand on the sidelines. And again, that may just be specific to me.
I don't know. We're facing a serious challenge in front of us, and here, and the whole world feels it. It's not the US. It's the entire world watched some of those events in the last couple of weeks, and we're all very upset. And so the question is, how do we act? Because if we stay at home, and by the way, I lived in Berlin and West Germany in the Cold War for 4 years. If we stay at home, we've got every chance of the horrendous atrocities that October 7th reflected, and walls and all kinds of Cold War type of experience. And so, it's our generation, hopefully with experience myself of lots of failures and knowing what I care about. But it's your generation, Andrew.
It's a big question. I also realize, I don't know, let me take a second here. I think that I really like what you said, Kathy, about waking up and engaging. When I was in college, I think one of the most meaningful things I was a part of was an organization called Civics, where we were 60 volunteers and 30 fifth grade Boston public school systems. And once a week, we'd go in and teach them about civics, which was both how does a bill become a law, what's the electoral college, and also what are issues in your community and what tools do you have in your toolkit, even as a fifth grader, to respond. And I think that this notion of, instead of watching TikTok videos and thinking you have a fully formed opinion about any political topic, get engaged. What does it mean to be an activist? I know for many people, activist might be a very charged word, but to be actively involved in something, I think, is wonderful, and find something you're passionate about and find the topics or the issues that are passionate to you and engaging, because I think if nothing else, our generation certainly has a lot of passion. It's just about channeling that into, I guess, productive and meaningful pursuits.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, Kathy, putting you on the spot, but if you had Andrew for one more minute and you never saw him again, what would be the one or two things that you'd say can be recommendations or whatever?
Well, I don't think I have anything to teach Andrew. I can say that, but I can say that I'm just really impressed by your authenticity. And I think to be able to hold on to that and carry that into every aspect of your life. And Kath, I'm sure I can't say where you come down on this, but I know for me that there have been many forks in the road in my career in which I chose a different path because I needed to be with my children more. And so I'm grateful that I think now that isn't just a woman's question, but it's an everybody question if you can, to figure out what it means at a young age. It took me a while to be able to say things like, yes, I'm leaving early because I'm going to my kid's soccer game, and just stating it like that is what I'm doing. And yes, I will be back on the computer after the soccer game, whatever it takes. But having the confidence and the ability to prioritize, because not to get like too cliche, but you don't get that time back. And so I do value the time that I took as much as I could, while still, for the most part, working full time, to prioritize being with them.
Oh, Kathy, I totally relate. No one teaches that in business school. Really, Roy, thank you for that. Okay, Andrew, you get a chance to wrap us up and tell Kathy and me what we're supposed to do.
Well,
you guys
I don't know
are
what
the
you're
ones
supposed to do.
No, I'm not supposed to.
I will say that the fact that you are putting together this podcast, and Kathy, that you opted in to engaging with me, is, I think, incredible. And I love these kinds of conversations. And I think it's easy from all sides to look at the news and say, oh, that generation, they don't get it, they're the problem. Or even for the younger people to say, oh, look what the older generation has saddled us with. And I just love these kinds of conversations. It sounds like we agreed on a lot of things. And even if we vociferously disagreed on a lot of topics, it still would have been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you for joining us. For more insights and information, visit my website at katherinemclennan.com. That's spelled KATHARINEMCLENNAN.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the series so you know when the next episode will be, as we continue exchanging wisdom, connecting past, present, and future through the perspectives of Stanford MBA graduates of 1995 and 2025.